So, um, good morning, everybody. We're going to get started now, and we are recording this so that way if folks aren't able to join this morning, we will share the information with them up online. Um, Hello, it's good to see you and thank you for being here. And I am glad to talk a little bit about the comprehensive exam and the thesis. I know we have quite a few of you who are first years, so you're thinking quite ahead. And many of you who are also in your second or third year who might still be making decisions about what to do. And so hopefully by the time you leave here today, you have a better sense about both of these options and some of the things to just keep in mind for yourselves. We also are joined by 4 of our alumni, 2 PPSers and 2 CSPers, who I am excited to have you connect with in just a minute or two. And I'm gonna ask them to introduce themselves after I give a little bit of an overview about both of these options. So I'm gonna go ahead and share my screen and walk through a little bit of an overview of both comps, exam, and thesis. So getting us started in terms of specifics. So for those of you who aren't aware, the comprehensive exam is offered 3 times a year in January, June, and September. Typically, this is taken in your final semester of the program. So you would register for the EDCG 5XC comprehensive exam in whichever semester is your final semester of the program. If you take it earlier than your final semester, there are going to be the potential that there will be questions on the exam that you haven't yet finished your coursework for. So it is particularly important to keep that in mind. So while you can take the exam maybe in your second to last semester and try to get it out of the way, we as faculty encourage you to wait until you have all of your coursework in your final semester, partly because any coursework that you're taking in your final semester, there will not be a question about that on the exam. So keep that in mind. The exam is 4 hours long. There is a 2-hour block in the morning. There's a 2-hour block in the afternoon and an hour break for lunch. The exam is set up as short essay response questions. There are 6 questions in total that you have to respond to. Out of those, there are going to be 4 questions, so 2 in each of the blocks, where you are essentially given 2 questions and you can decide which one you want to answer. The one you answer, the one that you feel most comfortable answering. There is also 1 question in each block, so a total of 2 questions that are required for every single person to respond to. Everyone in your program has the same question and must answer that question. Typically, what I like to say is that the forced questions, which the ones that are required for everyone, are questions that you would imagine for our program would be ones that you should know, right? So essentially, those are typically pulled from the core counseling classes. So, for example, it could be a question on cultural proficiency framework. It could be a question about group counseling. It could be a question about counseling theory and practice, and also micro skills. And so that's usually what the topics are pulled from for your forced questions, whereas the ones where you get choice are typically questions that you might have, let's say, an ethics question, and also an Oregon admin question that are against one another, and you can decide which one you want to answer. Questions are directly pulled from your coursework, and they are focused on the application of theory to practice. So it is not that we are looking for, the dates of when these theories are created, but instead, what are the key concepts that are connected to these theories, and how would you actually put them into practice when working with students? That becomes the bigger focus. And we really want to make sure that you are demonstrating a strong knowledge and then application. Your exams are scored by the faculty. Your exams do not have your name on them, and they are typed. So we review the typed work, Without identification, each student is assigned a number that Jennifer, as our administrative assistant, is the only one who has the key to that number. And we review them on a scale of 1 to 4. So each question is graded from 1, which is a fail grade, to 2, 3, or 4, which are all passing grades. You must pass 4 or more questions to pass outright. Although if you miss 1 or 2 questions, you must retake and pass those question topics. So you do have to schedule a retake for any questions that you miss in terms of 1 or 2 after the exam scores are received. And essentially in that, we don't give you the same question, but we do pull from the same topic. So you don't have to necessarily have to study all over again. We tell you exactly, like if it's law and ethics is the one that you didn't pass successfully, then we issue you a new question that's related to law and ethics. If you do miss 3 or more questions, however, that does mean that you need to retake the entire exam over again. And typically we say that you have to wait until the next exam period, although if there are issues with that, if you need it in order to move forward with the job search, you can appeal to the department chair, who I hear is pretty reasonable and will work with you to issue a new test before the end of the semester. So hopefully you can be able to do that. And again, one of the things that I think many students fear is like that failing the comps and not being ready. I just want to sort of say it is very rare for students to fail the comprehensive exam outright. There is maybe 1 or 2 students each year out of all of our students who might run into an issue where they do fail, and that's oftentimes because they haven't necessarily studied. And when they walk into the exam room, they know that they're not ready for it, and they sort of crunched at the last minute. Other things were sort of taking a priority, and then essentially that's sort of how it's worked out. Most students pass, or maybe need to retake 1 or 2 questions, and so again, I just want to sort of stipulate that that's oftentimes a concern, but it actually is very rare for students to fail the entire exam outright. So switching gears to thesis. So for thesis option, you must register for the EDGN 599 thesis class, which is a 3-unit class offered only in the spring semester. You continue to work on work completed in the EDG 510 class that you take in the second to last fall semester of your class, where in that class you have already written chapters 2 and 3 and also completed your IRB application. And so in the spring class, you're collecting your data, analyzing your data, which then leads you to write chapters 1, 4, and 5. Additionally, many students will already come to the thesis class having written a portion of chapter 1 as well, because in the fall class, as of right now, we have the statement of the research problem or the statement of the research question assignment that is probably about half of chapter 1. So some students might have to go back and pick that back up and finish out chapter 1, but it typically is not something that you have to write from scratch in the spring class. For the thesis, you do participate as a requirement in the GSOE's Research Poster Symposium, which is a part of Festival of Scholars, usually in every April. You also have to have an interest in your research topic and you want to see it through. So that's really important. And you must plan accordingly for your data collection and analysis. And so again, thinking about this, you might want to hire somebody to transcribe your interviews if you're doing qualitative work. Or if you are doing translation work, you might want to hire somebody to translate documents, including transcriptions, if you're speaking to participants in another language. You might want to offer some form of compensation to your participants, such as if they participate, they get put into a drawing for a gift card, or if you're doing focus groups or interviews, you may buy pizza and provide that to folks who are in attendance. So there is a little bit that you might have to think about. And of course, you don't have to do any of those things, right? It's not a requirement, but sometimes those are some extra costs that some folks decide that they do want to do as a part of their research process. And then lastly, you do have to write your thesis, right? So, and when looking at it, a full thesis is at minimum about 60 pages long. But again, keep in mind that while that seems like a lot, you have already written a couple of the chapters in full, typically already in your fall class that everyone is required to take for 510. And so moving forward, you will have divided up some of the work for the thesis as you go through the research core sequence of classes at the end of your program. So very briefly, I want to sort of do a pros and cons. At least this is from my view, right? And students might have a different, different thought. But in terms of the comprehensive exam, some pros that I see is that while you certainly will need to take the time to study well, it's less time intensive, right? You show up the day that it's offered and you take it and you leave, and pretty much that's that, unless you do have to take a retake. Um, it's good for folks who don't mind taking tests and actually who are good test takers. Um, it's also done at the start of your final semester of the program, so that way you sort of have it. If you've passed, thankfully, then that's it. You don't have to do anything further, and it helps if you recall of important. It helps you recall important topics as you prepare for your job search, because again, sometimes you might get interview questions that might ask you about theories or concepts and being able to sort of put those into practice. And so the comps does actually help in some of those cases prepare you for those types of questions. In terms of cons, it can be challenging for folks who aren't terrific at memorizing or remembering concepts off the top of their head, right? So we don't allow folks to have a cheat sheet or a notes that they can bring into the exam with them. You can't have any notes with you. It can be anxiety producing, right? It is an exam, so that can be a challenge. And I will say, students often freak out more about comps than they need to. So therefore, it is important to go to the prep workshop and also to potentially participate in a study group if you find that that would be helpful. And then lastly, the pros and cons for thesis. A pro is that if you already have a topic you're passionate about and you've already done the hard work in fall class in the 510 course, because that's where you write the lit review and you plan your methodology. So the spring, I think personally, is actually more fun because you actually get to put your project into motion and collect the data and then analyze it. And certainly that is a lot of work, but it's actually quite fun to actually do the project that you've conceptualized. It is a good option for folks who don't like taking tests. But I also warn you, just because you don't like taking tests is not a good reason to take thesis, because that's another piece. Like you want to be also feeling strong about your writing and that you are ready and motivated to actually write the thesis, right? Because otherwise it's going to feel like a slog. And you will have a final thesis that you'll be very proud of, without a doubt. Like no one at the end of the process, when you have it bound and it's sitting there, is going to be able to take that away from you. And so there is, I think, a sense of accomplishment by many folks who write the thesis that feels different than maybe folks who just do comprehensive exam. Um, the cons, it can be very time consuming and intensive, right? You have to write regularly and understandably, there is a great deal of time that's connected to it. It also can be anxiety producing. So it is a thesis, right? And so it's something that it can be a challenge, and it's not always gonna go the ways that you want it to go. There can be some unexpected costs attached, but again, as I noted, hopefully they're not so unexpected now that I've sort of shared about them in the previous slide. And then also, if you don't have to pay for folks to transcribe your work if you can do it yourself. But again, that just takes extra time. So again, it's sort of, you have to weigh your options and think through that. The last piece certainly though is a big con, and I understand that. You do have to pay for an additional 3-unit course, which can sometimes be an issue for folks. Although again, when you take the comps, there is a comps exam fee that you also are responsible for paying as well. But it's not the same amount of money as a 3-unit course, understandably. Although I do want to say that for some students, taking the thesis in your last semester can be helpful, because if you are only in a 2-unit fieldwork course at the end of your program, you won't qualify for financial aid because the 2 units is below the 3 units necessary to be a full-time student in a grad program. So that is another consideration just to keep in mind. For some programs, if depending upon how you stagger your units, especially for PPSers, if you do only have the one fieldwork 2 or the field studies 2 class, the 534 class, you will only have 2 units in your final semester of the program. And so that's just something to consider. Other students take the CWA course or other ways to get around that. So even if you choose comps, another strategy in terms of still qualifying for financial aid is doing the CWA fieldwork class. So then you also can get the CWA child welfare and attendance credential added on, and that would be a way. In addition, if you decided not to do thesis, you could do that. Although you could still do CWA and thesis too, although it's just a lot of time. So anyway, those are sort of my quick overview about both. And so at this point, I'm going to ask our guests to introduce themselves to you, and then we'll open it up. I have a few questions that I'll lead off asking them, and then we will open it up to your questions for them. So I'm gonna just probably go in alphabetical order by first name. And so Alex, can you lead us off with your introduction of yourself?
Of course. Can you hear me? I just want to make sure.
Yes.
Okay, perfect. Good morning, everyone. My name is Alex Yepes, pronouns he, him, his. I'm from the class of 2020, and I did the thesis option. And just a little bit about my thesis, it was on Latinx men in men of color programs and the influence of peers on the identity development. So it's a little bit about me.
Thanks, Alex. Andrew, can you go next?
Good morning. My name is Andrew Castro, pronouns he, him, his. I graduated from the CSP program in 2019. I did the comps, and now I work at Cal Lutheran in the Residence Life Department as a coordinator.
Thanks, Andrew. Carmen, can I ask you to go next?
Hello, my name's Carmen. My pronouns are she and hers. I did the thesis. I am class of 2020. So my topic for my thesis was focusing on Latino parental involvement in middle school students, looking at their cultural values.
Thank you. And Mercedes. Oh, Mercedes, you're muted still.
Thank you. Hi, everybody. My name is Mercedes Vasquez, pronouns she, her, hers. I graduated 2020 from the PPS program, and I did the comps route.
Excellent. Thanks again to our guests to be here and to join us. So I'm going to lead off with the first question. And could you talk a little bit about how you made your final choice between doing comps or thesis? And were there any specific factors that you had to take into account for your choice? And I'll open it up to whoever wants to start us off.
I can start. I did the comps route. One decision, or what led to that decision primarily was financial and time restraints. So for me, I worked full time during the program, and it would be very difficult for me to balance both my work life, my classes, and doing the thesis route. So that really led into my decision making. On the other side, I have very strong writing skills and test taking skills. So I wanted to utilize that skill set that I had to do the comps project. So those both came into my mind when I was making the decision.
Awesome, thank you.
I can go. So for me, in deciding the thesis, I kind of knew I wanted to do the thesis entering the program. I remember interviewing with Dr. T and just telling him straight up. But throughout my experience, it was more of taking the 510 class and having it done, having pretty much a little bit less than half of your thesis done was a huge, okay, it's a huge relief. And for me, specifically being a huge procrastinator, it was something less that I had to worry about. And it didn't seem, a semester to complete a thesis didn't seem so daunting. And just another aspect is I love research, and I was interested in my topic throughout the whole program. So most of my papers for student development, for group, for leadership, it revolved around my topic. So I had already collected a lot of the articles, the research. I was familiar with a lot of the theories that researchers use. So so for me, it was kind of, and I'm a terrible test taker too. So.
Okay, I can go next. So for me, before I even started the program, I knew I wanted to do my thesis. I'm very passionate about my topic. And just like Alex mentioned, having, doing all that chapters, chapter 2 and chapter 3 and 510, it really helped me a lot because you already have like half of your thesis done. And just like Dr. T said, for me personally, it was a fun experience going into my thesis class, running my group and getting all the information. Personally, it was really fun for me and I enjoyed doing my thesis.
For me with the comps, what I'll say is my last year of the program was really difficult because November was the borderline shooting. And so working on campus in res life, there was a lot that semester where I was taking that last research class. And so I was struggling quite a bit with that. And so that pushed me towards comps because what was also happening is I was doing a national search for my job. And so that was going to take a lot of time and energy in my last semester of the program. And I wasn't sure if I was going to be able to fully complete the comps or the thesis. And then also I was having a really hard time with honing in my topic. And so there was a lot to it, a lot of factors with the topic, and it was really difficult. And so I went with the comps and it was a really good decision for me.
Awesome. Thank you for that. So that sort of leads us into my next question. If you had to make the decision again, would you still choose the choice that you made? Why or why not? So can we maybe go in reverse order? So Andrew, you want to start us off?
Sure. I think I would still make the same decision. I was committed to doing my thesis the first 2 years of my program. And then after having taken the comps, I was like, oh my God, I should have just decided on comps early on. And I think I would still do the same thing because the thing too is I probably do want to go and get my doctorate later on, and I can write a dissertation then. And for me, the thesis was not what I wanted to do at that time. So.
Absolutely. Yeah, if I can just interject, I just want to say, right, like that I think is one of the biggest things that folks feel. Like if they might want to do doctoral work down the line, that they feel like they have to do a thesis. And I just want to say, friends, no, you do not. Like no EDD or PhD program typically is going to ask, like, I want to read your thesis in order for you to be eligible for admission. Like I promise you, none of us as faculty have the time to read your thesis. And as I like to tell my thesis students, no one will read your thesis except for me as your instructor. So, like the real thing is that even your parents aren't going to read your full thesis if you write a thesis, right? Like, so I can probably tell you that my parents have never read my dissertation and never will, even though it sits on their shelf in their house. So like that, just keep that in mind. It's not going to set you back. Comps is still fine. In my master's program, I did not choose the thesis option. I instead did the other option, which was not comps, but writing a seminar paper. I still got admitted into a PhD program. I'm doing okay. So don't feel like this is your end all be all, right? So sorry, thanks. Carmen, you want to go next?
If I had to do it again, I would choose thesis. Just like I said, I enjoy doing my thesis, and I wouldn't change it. I loved everything that I learned throughout the process.
Great. Alex?
Yeah, for me also, I 100% do the thesis again. It was just a really rewarding experience, and to have it, like, have a hard copy published in your hand. Like I ended up printing it out, or my wife did, and surprised me with it. And and it felt really cool, like flipping through the pages and looking at all my typos, or things that I could have written better. But actually, Dr. T, my wife, read my thesis. But it was a really huge rewarding experience, and I'd 100% do it again.
Mercedes?
Yes, I would do the comps again. Specifically because, like I said, I was working full time, and then I also had my field studies hours that I had to do on the side. So that in and of itself was very hard to balance. Throwing a thesis project on top of that, I know I would have had overload. And then with everything happening with COVID, yeah, that would have been intense. Also, I think for me, I didn't I don't think I had access to a population that I would want to do my thesis passion project on anyway.
Mhm.
So I kind of like what Andrew said earlier. I am interested in getting my doctorate long term, so that could be like where I save my passion project for. So it made sense for me to do the comps, and I would continue that decision if I had to make it again.
Yeah, good. So for Andrew and Mercedes, can you talk a little bit about how you prepared for the comps exam and what might have worked well for you? What might have been some challenges that you could have encountered along the way at all?
I can start. So for me, I did do a study group, and so there was about like 4 or 5 of us in our study group. We met a couple times, but I think for me that was a little more challenging because what I found is that I remembered a lot of the information from our program easily because of the fact that I was in so many internships along the way. And so I was using a lot of like my practical knowledge to like remember the skills. And so not everyone was at the same place. Um, and so I was studying apart from them as well. And what I did is I actually like went back through all of the class syllabi and was like picking out like different parts of the classes. And so I focused a lot on cultural proficiency, and then I made sure to remember like a couple theories from every class. I didn't need to think like, oh, I need to remember everything from all classes, but like a couple things along the way that'll help me. Like if you were told to compare and contrast 2 theories, like do you know 2 theories from like student development if that was the case? And so, and I think that the other thing too is I didn't want to start too early with studying because I would have felt really overwhelmed. So I think I started just after Christmas. And comps were like January 26th for us. And so I had about a month of studying, and that was perfect for me.
Thanks.
Yeah, I would echo pretty much everything that Andrew said. I started studying about the end of the semester prior to the comps is when I started my studying. If you have access, connect with study groups, compare notes. Definitely the syllabus trick worked for me too. I went back on my CLU Blackboard and downloaded all of the syllabuses and used that to find my key terms, and that was very helpful. Also attend like meetings like this. You'll attend groups like this or meetings that go over study tips and also what's on the comps and what courses are going to be mandatory questions and what courses may not be mandatory questions. So based on that, you can kind of shift where you want to study. I would memorize quite a few key terms and theories, and also challenge yourself to figure out, if I were in, this setting, how would I use this theory in practice? So ask yourself those challenging questions when you're memorizing the theories as well.
Yeah, great. And as sort of, again, a plug, hopefully folks received the email that went out, I believe yesterday, about the upcoming comps prep workshop. That email just went out to third year students because the comps prep workshop is just for third year students who are going to be wrapping up their programs. And so if that is you should have received an email indicating that is happening on November 7th from 9 until noon with the Zoom link, and Professor Rowley will be facilitating that workshop. So yeah, as Mercedes said, we give out handouts and talk about breaking down all about comps and giving a lot of information about it, including sample questions and talking about how to even prepare and think through what might be the types of questions that you might get on the exam, right? So that becomes an important part of that workshop particularly. And again, I would also say, if you are still on the fence, right, between thesis and comps, it also doesn't hurt to attend that. So if you can, even if you are thinking, oh, I might do thesis still, I suggest going to that comps prep workshop, because if you decide in the end, at the last minute, you know what, yeah, I just want to do comps, I just really want to get it over and done with, then that's better for you in your preparation than having to miss it and then not being able to have the same level of preparedness, right? So again, I do encourage you, if you're sort of on the fence, I encourage you to think about attending that. So for Alex and Carmen, can you chat a bit about your experience of moving through the research courses, and were there any specific challenges you faced through your projects? And how did you navigate the process of doing your thesis data collection and analysis? Carmen, you want to start it? Oh, okay, go for it.
All right.
Go for it, Alex.
All right. So I think for me, navigating through, like I mentioned, I had already made my decision prior to entering the research class. So I had the intention from the 509 class, like, okay, this is where I'm going to start focusing on collecting the research for my literature review. That class really helped me. And I was like, I don't know if folks have already taken it, but in focusing on like annotation and writing like just quick summaries of of your articles, so that way you're not just caught in this headspace of trying to memorize everything that was in that article. So for me, I used OneNote, Microsoft OneNote, to just kind of gather all my annotations, my summaries of articles, and that really, what I love about the course sequence, it flows and it's continuous process. And so it's not just, you pick up where you leave off. And at least I had a professor that kind of took the time to understand, okay, where are you at in the process and how can we, move forward? I think a specific challenge that I faced was getting feedback before I entered the thesis class. I got great feedback from my professor. However, when it came down to peer review, I loved my peers. However, they weren't invested into the thesis process as, or they weren't planning on doing the thesis. So when it came down to peer review, they weren't really concerned or really had the intention of kind of digging deep into what I had written to give me that critique. And it wasn't until I entered the 599 class with Dr. T and Carmen, where we all took the time and we all really gave intentional feedback, and that really helped. I think another challenge was mid-semester. It was, stay-at-home order, and fortunately for me, the day they announced the stay-at-home order, that was the day I did my focus group. So I had already collected my data, and I had already had my participants, and that was, that. But transition to online learning was kind of difficult because, on top of my job, I work at Ventura College. So on top of that, like transitioning everything, like working at home to, doing school at home. And I think, in navigating the data collection, I did end up just doing a transcription service, and it saved me a lot of time. It's worth the investment, because in my undergrad, I did a manual transcription for my that last class. I forget what it's called.
Capstone.
Capstone. There you go. And so I did not have the time to do transcription. Like, I'm also a father, so like to just sit down and try to listen while Paw Patrol's playing in the background, I can't do that. And so it's very time consuming to analyze it too, and to just you overthink it. Like, I remember setting a meeting with Dr. T and being like, Dr. T, I don't know, what are my codes? I don't know what my codes are. They're not here. And really taking that step back, and like you're looking at, there's different steps to the analyzation process. And so that's just a little bit about my experience.
Thank you.
Okay, so for me, since I knew I wanted to do my thesis, since we did our summer course 509, I already started looking for articles that I needed for my topic. I had my same professor for 509 and 510. Unfortunately, I didn't get enough or good feedback either from my professor or peers. So it was difficult for me once I started my thesis class. Luckily, Dr. T does have a thesis boot camp, which I totally took advantage of. And I suggest you take advantage of it if he offers it again. It starts right after winter break, so even before spring semester, and that helped me a lot. He provided me with a lot of feedback, and I really appreciated it. So that was going into my thesis. Just like Alex said, it's totally worth it to pay a transcriber. I paid for my transcription. because mine was in Spanish, so I had to look for a different transcriber than Dr. T recommended. It wasn't too expensive, but I didn't have time to transcribe it myself because with field work and I was doing my CWA. As we went into distance learning, it was a little difficult for me because, going into the thesis class, actually being present, that was my time to focus on my thesis because at my home, my home life is very different. I can't focus on my thesis. So it was really hard for me to like zone everything out and just focus on my thesis when we were in distance learning, especially with all the libraries and everything closed. So that was some of the difficulties that I had. I did a focus group. So luckily I did it with parents. So I had all the parents. I actually had my focus group 1 week before all the schools closed. Luckily, I did my internship at the site that I did my focus group. So the parents already knew of me and who I was. So it was easy enough to have, parents sign up for my interview. So I was very lucky enough. And then also the staff at that school were very helpful. They provided me with, since my interview was in Spanish, I had to translate a lot of my documentation into Spanish, such as the consent form, the flyers and everything. And since I speak Spanish too, I was able to write them, but I had to go through other people to make sure, I was using the correct language. So luckily, I went to the parapros that work there and they helped me with all that process. So it's just having those connections where you're doing your focus group and knowing that you have that support, both at the school site where you're doing your focus group and with Dr. T at school too. So that was my experience.
Great. So for all of you, my last question before we open it up to the students here, what advice would you give to folks as they weigh their options and make the decision between comps and thesis? Anybody want to start us off for that?
I can start. I think one of the most important things is that you should be open to doing both because like you have until November really when class registration happens to make a decision and to really prep yourself for your thesis starting in 509. Like I said, I didn't decide until November. And so in 509, I had a topic and I stuck with it through 510. And so that's really helpful. And the other thing is that you're making a decision for you. I think that one thing that I was really going back and forth with is like, I'm a first-gen student. I told my family I was going to write a thesis. And I was like, how do I like break it to them that I'm not? And then I remember they're never going to read it. And so like I needed to graduate. And so that's why I was like, all right, I'm going to just do the comps. And then they were still proud of me, like walking across that stage. And so making a decision for yourself is the most important thing.
Well, my advice for you is to do what's best for you. You know you and your circumstance and how much you will be involved in either the comps and the thesis. Just like I mentioned, I really loved my topic. So I was very driven to my topic and my thesis, which that's why I did my thesis. So it's really, you have to sit down and look at the pros and cons and see which one you prefer to doing. And just like Andrew said, be open to both. You could, prepare for your thesis during the research classes. And then at the last moment, if you want to do your comps, you could do it, but at least you have that information already.
And I would echo what both Carmen and Andrew said too. Just check in with yourself, see what makes more sense for you. Do you have a passion project? Are you going to have fun doing this thesis project? Then go for it. Do you have strong research skills? Do you have a question you want to answer? Thesis might work. Are you strong at taking tests? Do you like to learn about different theories and think about how you can put theory into practice? Then comps might be more up your alley too. And also think about future employment and how you can leverage what you do with your time. Can you leverage this thesis project to future employment? Do you not have maybe experience working with this population, but you have a thesis project working with this population that you can also like utilize and talk about? And honestly, just going through so many interviews this past few months, Dr. T's right. The comps project has helped me so much in my interviews because they do ask you questions about, well, what theories do you work with? Who would you use in this situation? I've talked about Maslow's hierarchy of needs like in every interview that I've had so far, and you always get those nods from the interviewers. So just check in with yourself, see what makes more sense for you and your story. Both are great options. One's not better than the other.
Yeah, again, I echo my peers. But I think one thing that if I were to go back in time, like I said, I would still 100% do the thesis. However, I would pay more attention to what are my roles outside of being a student. And for me, that's something the thesis was something that I was like, for sure, like when I had committed to it, my daughter was still very young. So if you have, children or you're working full time, um, pay attention to that and just, understand like, how much is each role going to sacrifice for you to complete this project, especially if you're committing to do the thesis. Because I had a lot of fun with it, but it was very stressful. It was very, I had to miss a lot of, Sunday fun days with my family to just kind of, lock myself in my office and do the work. So just pay attention to your roles and, again, I love what Andrew said. It's do it for yourself. Whatever you decide to do it for yourself. Because there was a point in time where I felt like, am I doing the thesis so like for fulfillment of my needs or my goals, or am I doing it to impress people at work or people in the field? So really take the time to just kind of do that self-reflection before you decide.
Thank you. I think all of that is really helpful advice. And I want to reiterate something that Mercedes said just a minute ago. I firmly believe there is no better, right? Like comps or thesis, you don't get extra points. There's no gold stars that you get. Like both are good measurement tools. And again, as a program that talks about cultural proficiency, we want you to choose the one that actually is going to be best for you, right? Like that's important because we know that for some students, taking a test is not a helpful way for them to sort of prove their measurement of their learning. And so writing a thesis may be the better option. We also recognize for other folks, doing the investment of a thesis is just not possible for their work situation, for their financial situation, for just their life situation. And so again, we want to provide both of these options to you as a department, so that way you can make the best choice for you. So I want to reiterate, there is no best, right? They're both equal, and your degree will be the same. You're going to graduate with the same degree, no matter if you do the comps or the thesis. So again, choose what's best for you. That's the biggest thing that I think is important to hear. So for those of you who have joined us on the later side of things, earlier on, I asked folks to, in the chat, identify what they would like to learn more about. Is it learning more about comps or learning more about thesis? If you're sort of on the fence, I encourage you to maybe think about maybe identifying thesis, because there will be other opportunities for you to learn more about comps, such as the comps prep workshop. So if you haven't yet in the chat been able to sort of identify which one you have a preference with, I would encourage you to do that, because we're going to start to move into some breakout rooms between thesis and comps, and our guests who are alums of the program are going to facilitate some conversations to folks based upon your choices. So we aren't going to regroup as a large group after we split off. So, the conversations will go until folks have gotten their questions answered by our panelists. And then from there, you can head out once those conversations are wrapped up. And so this is going to be the last portion of our time together. And again, we will be in these separate breakout room spaces. And again, our panelists are eager to answer any and all questions that you have yourselves as students making these decisions. So again, if you can submit which room you want to be in, the thesis or the comps. I'll make some final assignments from some of these that I've just gotten from folks, and then we will move folks over. So bear with me just for a minute. All right, so I'm going to open up these breakout room spaces, and we will, again, thank you for our panelists for what you've had to share with us already. And I will be bouncing back and forth between both rooms just to check in on folks. And we'll go from there. So I'm going to open up these rooms and we'll have some further conversation.